I often read Reddit when I'm bored at work. I love reading all these let's not meet stories and figure it's time I posted my own. So my mom left a picture when I was 3. She literally picked up one day and just walked out. So for a long time, it was just my dad and I. I'm a male, and at the time my dad met Tammy, I was 13. I was chubby and at the time small for my age. I still had my baby fat. I was and still am a nerd. So was my dad, and we shared a love of Star Wars, comic books, and science fiction. My dad decided he needed to meet someone. He was lonely and I thought it would be nice to have a mother figure. This was before online dating, and there was still personals in the newspaper. My dad filled out an ad and it wasn't long before he met Tammy. I remember him telling me about her and how happy he looked. They dated for about a month before my dad figured it was getting serious, and he wanted to introduce me to her. So my dad decided to take us out for dinner and then a movie. I remember my grandma helping me get dressed, and I was super nervous to meet her. She seemed nice at first, but even at that age I could sense something was just off. We went to Sizzler's for dinner, and my dad told me to order whatever I liked. He then excused himself to go to the bathroom. I smiled at Tammy and went to say something, and she cuts me off, telling me that my dad's been letting me eat whatever I wanted, and that I'm a fat little piggy. She demonstrated this by actually fucking making pig noises. I was crushed. I mean, honestly, I wasn't very heavy, maybe a little chubby, but not obese like some children are today. My dad didn't actually let me eat whatever I wanted, but anyways, back to the story. She ignored me until my dad came back and then played nice. I, for my dad's sake, faked being nice to her. I wanted to tell my dad what she had said, but I didn't want to disappoint him or upset him. My dad was and still is my best friend. Anyway, I hoped and prayed that my dad would realize what a bitch she was and come to his senses, but sadly he never did. They dated steadily, and when I was 15, Tammy moved in. Now that summer, I finally lost my baby fat and grew like a good foot or 2. My dad's 6'3", so it wasn't surprising that I shot up to almost 6 feet by age 15. Puberty kicked in and my voice was doing that weird cracking thing. I made it a point to try and avoid Tammy. I went to school, came home and stayed in my room, did homework and waited for my dad to get home. However, she started in on me most days as soon as I walked in. She'd always find something. I was a loser. I was stupid. Just cruel, mean things. The few times I told my dad, he just insisted we all needed to adjust. So I just decided I could put up with her for 3 more years for my dad's sake, and then I would be out of there. The next 3 years sucked. Her insults got meaner, and she would also do things like put glass, pieces of paper, and sand in my food. I started refusing to eat her food because I was terrified she'd try and poison me. This was around the time that my dad and her got married. Graduation came and I was so relieved I was set to enlist in the army. I planned on being in basic by July, but of course she had to try and ruin that. My recruiter got a call from someone saying I smoked pot and did drugs. Thankfully, I passed my drug test, but I know it was her. One night before I left for boot camp, my dad had a huge party for me. She had tried to cancel it earlier, claiming that she was sick, but by that point my dad had already invited most of my family and friends, and wasn't going to cancel. She pouted the entire time, and I started to see that my dad was kind of starting to see past her facade. Let's skip ahead a few more years, and I get leave. I've been deployed twice now, and I hadn't seen my dad in 22 months, so I was dying to see him. He had told me in previous conversations that their marriage was pretty much over. She not only was controlling and verbally abusive, but a few weeks prior she had knocked my dad out with a cast iron skillet. He had given her an ultimatum of a month to get out, or he was throwing her crap out. The night I got in was late. My dad picked me up and we went home. She was gone supposedly. She had started moving her crap into her sister's and was pretty much staying most nights there. So Dad and I eat, and we get to bed. Around 1, I feel my bed move. I'm exhausted, and I figure it's just my dad's dog Caesar, a German Shepherd. That's when I feel hands go around my neck, and my soldier instincts kick in. I flip the intruder over and subdue them. My dad runs in and flips the light on. He's got his gun out. And surprise, surprise, it's my step monster. Dad calls the police and files a restraining order, and finally serves her with the divorce papers. A lot more shit happens after this, such as her destroying my dad's new Mercedes, but I won't bore you with all the details. What matters is that now they're divorced, and I never have to see that bitch Tammy again. A few years ago, I lived near a large expanse of national forest that was riddled with small winding trails and a larger set of roads that had been set up for forestry. It was about a half a mile walk from my home over to the Red Road, as I like to call it, a relatively well-kept lava rock pathway. Regardless of the season, even in the beginnings of a snowstorm, I still spent at least an hour a day out there. When I got a puppy, I easily integrated him into my walks. Whippets love following a bike or hitting up a hiking trail, sun, rain, or snow. He would follow me soundlessly, generally on a leash while near the houses, then off-leash when I got deep into the woods. He was like my shadow, and though he would occasionally bound ahead, he would stop and turn back to look at me when he got a bit too far ahead. One day, I was out a bit later in the day. The sun was starting to set, and it had grown chilly, to the point that I put a coat on the dog from out of my pack, and decided to cut my trip short. As I was nearing civilization, I called my dog to me and leashed him up, thinking I may have heard a car. We rounded the corner, coming out of the copse of trees, and into the open ground. I slow my walk instantly when I see an older black car parked near the entrance where the pavement turns to gravel. People would occasionally park near the entrance, but for some reason, this car caused me to pause. It was a bright black, with oversized silver rims and a small spoiler on the back. There's a man with a baseball cap leaning against the open passenger side window. He's gesturing violently to the people in the car, and he speaks to them in angry tones, although I'm too far away to hear what he's saying. But it's enough that I instantly decide to steer clear of the group. Unfortunately, there's no way out but the path they're parked on. My dog is a little spooked at this point, and is pushing against my legs and looking up at me. This doesn't help to settle my nerves. I've seen people in the park there before, I reason, but I get the distinct impression that they may be dealing something, very common where I'm at. I don't want to be caught in the middle, so I skirt along the road as far from the vehicle as I can. Even then, walking along the edges of the trees, they turn to look at me, and their angry voices cease momentarily. I hear them say something about my dog, but I just keep walking, doing what I can to ignore them. I feel my heart rattling in my chest, for reasons I'm unsure of. Something just feels off about them, but I'm not sure. Once they're out of earshot and I've walked quite a distance from them, I put my headphones back in, trying to lessen my nervousness. I'm looking down at the pavement, trying to refocus myself, when my dog begins to pull back on the leash. I give him a light tug forward and tell him to heel. I keep walking, feeling strange, and making my pace a little more brisk. Again, my dog pulls on the leash. I frown at him in annoyance, unaccustomed to his disobedience. I pull him forward one more time, but this time when I see his head turn back to look behind us, it catches my attention. I rip out my headphones and stare back the way we came. My dog lets out a high-pitched yip, looking back and then up at me. The man with the baseball cap is a short ways behind us. I grip the leash a little tighter and instantly spin around, quickly leading my dog towards the subdivision where the houses are. I figure the guy is just walking home. No big deal. But that doesn't do anything to dispel the slight edge of panic I'm beginning to feel. Something is not right. The whippet keeps looking back, and I have to tug him along. The hair bristles on his back, and he lets out a few fearful yips. My dog rarely barks and he loves strangers, so his reaction only feeds my inner paranoia. I steal a glance over my shoulder and realize, much to my horror, that the man is getting closer. I can see his face more clearly, though he's still a distance away. I begin to try and rationalize that I'm simply being paranoid. Despite this thought, I reach my hand behind me and into my pack, fishing my cell phone out of the side pocket and slipping it into my jeans. The man's presence is making me anxious, so I take the first right onto a gravel road that isn't even mine. I feel a rush of relief, thinking he'll head straight on the main road and it'll be fine. But it isn't fine. I hear the crunch of gravel behind me, and the dog is yanking wholeheartedly at the leash. My adrenaline suddenly whooshes into my bloodstream, and I feel my hands get clammy. He must just live down the road, I think, trying to soothe myself. It's a loop, the road I picked, so I know that it goes back to the main road towards where I live. But as I near the end of the loop, I glance back. The man in the baseball cap and the dark shirt is still behind me, keeping his distance but seemingly closer than ever before. Full-blown panic erupts. I know now that he appears to be following me. For what intent, I don't know. I can try to get to a house, but most of them have fences and gates, and people don't take too well to trespassers. I quickly pull my phone out of my pocket and flip it open, selecting home. It rings several times, making my blood pump erratically. My mom is home, but disabled, and often gets tired and falls asleep. It's about to go to voicemail, but she picks up, sounding groggy. "Someone's following me," I blurt out as quietly as I can. She instantly asks me where I am, and I whisper into the phone, carefully glancing over my shoulder. He's very close now, maybe 15 feet, and my dog is going crazy. She says she'll be right there. I walk as fast as I can without running, and I realize that the man behind me is also walking faster, and instead of increasing the distance between us, it remains the same. The houses are far from the gravel road, so I don't know where to go. I could try to get up to a house and then pound on a door, but then I wonder about that black car and if they have something to do with it. What if he calls them and they come too? I'm panicking, but I know my mom isn't far from me, so I start to jog, and my dog is keeping up, but constantly looking back. Suddenly a large truck comes into view. A huge wave of dust is pluming behind it. It comes to a very rapid halt in front of me, and I look back to see the man in the baseball cap sprinting into a yard to the left, running over someone's lawn and then disappearing behind a house. My mom gets out of the truck and comes over to me, saying breathlessly, "Is that him? Is that the guy who's following you?" I nod. There's no sight of him now. He's gone, having fled between the houses, and probably out onto a main road. We get into the truck and my mom is red-faced and panicked, but seems to be slowly calming down. "I don't want you going out anymore," she says, looking over at me. She starts driving us home, but I can't help wondering if that man with the baseball cap will be standing out in the road. When I look back, the gravel path is empty, except for the haze of dust we've just left behind. I don't go out for weeks, and when I finally convince my mom to let me go, I have to pack a knife in my bag to placate her. Even then, every time I walk to the open trail where I saw the black car, I always get nervous and somewhat angry. Angry that a stranger tried to make me afraid of the one thing I really love. This happened just over 2 years ago, and it has seriously made me rethink camping alone. I was with 2 friends this time, and I worry about what would have happened if I was by myself. 2 friends and myself were on a cross-country road trip, and Roswell, New Mexico was one of our stops. We were there for the Kishk, but we were also camping for most of the trip, so we got to a site at Bottomless Lake State Park. We did our thing in town for the day and headed back to our site around sundown. Everything seemed pretty standard at first. There were some neighbors camping down the road and we could hear their music, The Moldy Peaches, a pretty light-hearted soundtrack which didn't set the creepiest of tones. My two friends, who were a couple, read and wrote in their journals by lantern light, and I drank a couple of beers while taking long-exposure photographs of our campsites. The music died down. My friends got tired and went to sleep, and after I got the shot I wanted, I did too. I awoke fairly disoriented, somewhere in that state of transition from light to deep sleep. I heard crunching around my tent, not knowing if I was dreaming or not. I just kind of sat up in my tent to figure out if what I was hearing was real or just the remnants of sleep. I started to hear it again, and this time it was closer. This sound wasn't just closer, it was directly outside my tent. Understandably, the hair on the back of my neck was poker straight, and I knew something was up. There was a moment that I thought it could have been a ranger. Who knows, maybe our registration was messed up, or maybe we left the headlights on for the car. I asked out, "If someone is out there, can you please make your presence known?" Nothing. "Hello? Please identify yourself." Nothing. I sat there frozen with the most intense sense of fright I've ever felt, and it was dead silent. I calmed myself to lay back down, hoping I'd been imagining it, and closed my eyes. From what I could tell, within the next 5 minutes the footsteps started moving around my tent. I shot back up, and fucking knew someone was out there. At this moment, something so surreal happened that I can't quite adequately express my sense of fright. As I sat there open-mouthed and silent, the end of my tent started to be lifted up by the person outside. I screamed for my friends in their tent, screamed for them to wake up and that someone was outside. It felt really hectic. My friends were disoriented, I was disoriented, and from then on, I didn't hear or see anything else. My friend was basically yelling at me to stick my head out of my tent and check it out, but I was absolutely terrified that if I did, I'd get my head lopped off or have a gun stuck in my face. I finally worked up the balls and saw nothing. No one. We got out of the tents and into the car, and I told them everything. They seemed concerned yet skeptical. I was adamant that something had happened. We decided to shine our headlamps from the car in the direction of our tents, which was kind of surrounded by these rocky hills and a dried-up riverbed. As we scanned the rocks with our lights, another light hits the rocks right behind our tents. We decided that it would probably be a good idea to leave our shit and get a hotel room, so we headed to Roswell at about midnight. The whole night I felt kind of stupid. I was also really scared. I kept trying to tell myself that I was just dreaming, or that it was a raccoon, or that I'd just seen too many horror movies. We kind of joked about it, and watched Cops on this shitty motel TV, and fell asleep. When we went back in the morning, my fears were unfortunately confirmed. We rolled up and nothing seemed to be out of place. Nothing stolen or moved, or so we thought. We started picking up our things and beginning to take my tarp off. My friend says out loud, "Well, that really is fucking weird," and signals me over. The elastic bungee cords that hold the rain fly on his tent were cut, clean through, like with scissors or a knife. The tent was brand new. I went back over to my tent to see if it had the same, and was immediately drawn to the fresh boot prints that had circled my tent. Footprints that were on top of mine. That said, we packed up, and we did it fast. We almost didn't even really talk about it. I actually even think that my friend who got his tent cut open was still a bit skeptical. I can't say for certain who this person was, or what they were trying to do, but they certainly achieved scaring the living shit out of me. I'm a female corrections officer, prison guard or CO, and I stay with a relatively high number of death row inmates. However, few executions are actually carried out. I used to work for a large county, but I work for a different agency now. This county was my first CO job years ago, and before that I had worked in retail and customer service while studying criminal justice, so I was really green. I used to be very liberal. I still am liberal about a lot of things, but the job does change your perspective for most people. One thing that I used to believe very strongly was that no human being could be truly evil. This particular county jail is one of the oldest in the country, so parts of it have a totally linear layout. What I mean is that you have a long stretch of corridor with cells on either side, and the COs have to walk up and down to supervise the inmates. I'm actually giving enough information for anyone with good Google Foo skills to figure out a lot. As you can imagine, these linear layouts are not in style anymore, because you can't see every cell at the same time, but every inmate can see you. I have to say that units like this are extremely creepy too. I'm going to call this corridor the condos. We didn't call it that, but I do not want to share the exact term which is specific to this jail. Less than 10 years ago, a quadruple stabbing homicide happened not far from where I grew up. The murderer, Michaels, described it as a butchering, and he killed his former girlfriend, her family, and their neighbor because he came over when he heard the screams. When the police found Michaels soaked in blood and asked him what had happened, he said, "It's obvious, I just killed everyone." The cops said that he seemed completely emotionless when he said it. At the time, I had only been a CO for about 4 months, and our facility received him as a pre-trial detainee. Now obviously he wasn't our first or only murderer, but the nature of the crime, stabbings indicate a more dangerous personality than a shooting for one thing, and his lack of remorse was horrifying. He was considered a volatile inmate, so we placed him in an observation cell in the middle of the condos where a CO could always keep eyes on him. He would stand at his glass door in silence most of the day, just watching everyone. I swear he only spoke when he had visits. He actually had a full visits list of these big goth girls who would come in and swear they were in love with him. I don't know if this means anything, but his ex was a big girl, and he used to draw pictures of the fat female COs. For note, he was skinny and white with brown hair. One day I was working as a utilities officer, basically a floater who relieves people for breaks and helps out as needed. At this jail, utilities officers also got away with a ton of downtime and BSing. I was hanging out at one end of the condos where you could look down and see a lot of the jail, talking to another officer on duty. As they say, there are no secrets in jail. Plus, I was aware that there were points throughout the jail where you could hear very well into the neighboring cells, that sort of thing. We were being pretty quiet though, plus we stood a good 50 yards from Michael's observation cell. Also, you have to imagine it would be difficult to stand in the observation cell and press your face against the glass to see the people standing at a right angle so far from you. I was telling the other CO a funny story about my weekend, which I wouldn't do out on a correctional unit nowadays, but we weren't getting into anything too personal either. It was a long story involving my fiancée at the time. I wrapped up talking to this CO because I had to go to a gate to relieve another officer for chow, and I had to pass Michael's cell. I didn't like walking past it because he stood there and stared at you, and back then I wasn't so good at hiding my nervousness. He always had his head slightly tilted down so you could see the white under the irises of his eyes, again rarely saying a word. But today was different. I took one step past his door and heard him say, "Edgecombe," in a barely audible whisper. I didn't even know that he knew my name. Yes, our last names are on our uniforms, but I was never his primary officer and we never interacted. It caught me off guard, so instead of ignoring it, it stopped me in my tracks and I backpedaled to the door. He pointed to his mouth, and I leaned in to listen. His eyes looked so dark, I remember I felt hypnotized. He proceeded to recite word for word the story I had just quietly told the other officer at the end of the condos less than 2 minutes before, even copying the sound of my voice down to a subtle lisp. This seemed to go on forever. I felt like we were the only two there, no 22 millimeters of glass protecting me, just a 5-foot-tall female and a murderer. I remember thinking for the first time of another human being, this is evil and unfixable. Finally I said, "Sir, do you need something?" He started to laugh hysterically, and I walked away. I've been assaulted by other inmates. I've had piss thrown in my eyes. People play mind games with me constantly. I've met some damn good lip readers too, but this was like something else. Now I work at a maximum security institution where I babysit all rapists and murderers and pedophiles. I don't know how to make it make sense to you that this was the one and only time in my life where I felt inside of me like I was dealing with something not human. Michaels is in another institution now. He's on death row, but he refuses to appeal. He made it clear to the press that his decision is not out of remorse. He has none. He just doesn't give a shit, and it's most logical in his mind for him to die. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, or perhaps like, share, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a personal story that you'd like to send in, or if you'd just like to message me sometime, go ahead and take a look in the description below. There will be links to all of my social media accounts, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter account. Go ahead and check any of those out and send me a message, and I'll try to include your story in a video or get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline the name of the story and any possible themes it might have, as well as how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious at all about the music used in today's video, you can go ahead and check down there in the description. The music is always listed in the description below, in the order which it appears. I also name the tracks, and provide links to the artists if you feel like checking out more of their work. Last but not least, if you guys have any constructive criticism, please feel free to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.